You know that moment right before you fall asleep, when the room feels different? That's when they show up. So if you start hearing a noise while I'm talking, just pretend it's part of the story. Tracy from Tinder. When I was newly single after my 2-year relationship ended, I was back to living alone again and back to swiping on Tinder and all those apps. I had been single for a few months already, and I had met a few people in that time. During that time, I matched a girl on Tinder named Tracy, and she gave me her Snapchat, but it quickly fizzled out to her just watching my stories and not really communicating. That kind of used to happen all the time when I was in college, but now, being in my late 20s, using Tinder and being reminded of how immature all this online dating stuff is, it feels a lot different at this age. I own a corner townhome in a little community. If you're wondering what I do, I'm an accountant. Good money, but miserably boring. After my ex moved out, I thought I would be ready for the privacy and peace and quiet. But I'd say after the first month, the novelty of that wore off. Maybe I'm more of a relationship person, or I just need people around, but being alone was getting to me. That's why I was constantly swiping on dating apps and trying to go on dates just to get out of the house. This was last December. I posted something on my Snap story that had to do with Christmas, and guess who commented on my story? It was that Tracy girl who I hadn't spoken to in weeks. She struck up a conversation about us doing some Christmas-themed stuff together, and from there we started chatting for a bit. I suggested the most festive things I could think of is skating, going to the village and looking at the decorations, but she suggested we decorate my Christmas tree. Firstly, I did have a fake tree, but it was up in the attic, so I told her I didn't have it up yet because it's kind of a 2-person job getting it out of the attic. She said she'd gladly come over and help, so I figured why not. I told her to come over around 9 that night. It was already dark at that point when we made the plan. It was likely around 7:30 because I remember hurriedly grabbing my keys and rushing to drive to the liquor store to buy a couple bottles of wine. When I got back to the house, I vacuumed and swept the floors. Ever since my breakup, the things my girlfriend would do to clean the place were left to me, and I realized how quickly a place can get dirty. 9 p.m. rolled around, and I was low-key sitting upright on the couch with the TV on, pretending like I was just chilling in the living room watching a movie already. Meanwhile, I had set everything up to be cozy and relaxing, but I sat there for a while waiting on her to message me or for the doorbell. I sent a follow-up saying, "Let me know when you're on your way," and I eventually started to think she was flaking until finally around 9:30 when she said she's outside. She came inside, and I was shocked to find that I was looking up at her. She was a couple inches taller than me. I'm 5'10", so she had to be at least 6 feet tall. I also immediately picked up on the fact that she smelled like she was drenched in perfume. We went straight to the couch and sat down, and she sat really, really close to me, like our legs were touching. This is where I started to get confused about how exactly I was feeling. She looked a bit older, maybe a little rougher. I'm not sure how to explain it. And underneath that overpowering smell of cheap-smelling perfume, I couldn't help but feel like there was a slight hint of body odor, which completely turned me off. I asked her if she wanted wine, and she said, "Yes, please." So I went and poured a couple glasses as we talked. Have you ever met someone for the first time that you've been texting or DMing for a while, and when you finally meet, they just end up being nothing like you pictured in your head? That was pretty much this. Something about her felt off, like she lacked certain social cues. I handed her a glass of Merlot, and we cheered each other. I hell you not. She almost immediately spilled a huge drop of red wine on my light blue couch. I composed myself, but I wanted to scream. I said, "It's okay," as I ran to the kitchen to get a damp paper towel and a sponge. I ran back to the couch and blotted it as quickly as I could before it would settle. She kept apologizing, and I kept saying it was okay. After this, it got a little more tense, and to break the tension, I suggested getting the tree out of the attic. So I went up to the attic, slid over the giant box with all the tree parts in it, and started handing her down the pieces one by one, each piece getting bigger until we got to the biggest part, the part that I wouldn't be able to handle going down the ladder on my own. She grabbed it with ease. I had to remember this girl's size. Once everything was handed down, I went back down, and we assembled the tree in the living room with Christmas music playing. I poured her more wine, and I drank more myself. I loosened up a bit more. Wine makes any situation feel better. Once we had the tree set up, next were the ornaments. I told her my ornaments were all in the crawl space. These ornaments were all from my childhood. My parents gave me bins and bins of Christmas decorations. So I went down to the crawl space and one by one started taking out the bins while I left Tracy in the living room to relax. As I was doing all of this, I started feeling woozy, like the wine was getting to my head. I've never been a heavy drinker, so I do have a low tolerance, but I felt like I hadn't drunk that much to feel this way. I grabbed the first bin and started lugging it up the stairs. By the time I got to the top, Tracy wasn't anywhere in sight. I assumed she was in the bathroom at first and called her name. I looked around each room and then saw that the bathroom was empty. I scratched my head in confusion as I kept calling her name. I went to message her on Snap, but she never opened the Snap. I checked the 2 bedrooms too, but she was gone. I couldn't believe this. She snuck out on me. This was when I started wondering if she thought I was ugly or weird or something, even though, truthfully, I wasn't even really into her either. I crashed onto the couch, which suddenly felt a lot more comfortable than before, and honestly, as far as I remember, I periodically checked my phone to see if she opened my Snap, and just watched whatever was on TV until my memory just faded to black. I swear everything just went black, and then I woke up in darkness, no lights, no TV on. I looked around in the dark room, and I knew I was hearing things. I felt like I was still on the couch, and I felt weak. My limbs were hard to move, but I managed to find my phone right under me within seconds, and I checked the time. The second the phone screen lit up, I saw it, even though the light was facing toward me. That glow from my phone screen with the brightness all the way up revealed the outline of a tall person's silhouette standing in front of me. For some reason, I didn't scream. I just put the phone down, bringing the room back to darkness. I finally opened my mouth to say Tracy, hoping it was her, but still not in that moment remembering what had happened earlier. Whoever was standing there didn't answer me. I eventually picked my phone back up and turned on the flashlight, and I saw that it was in fact Tracy standing in front of me. She wasn't moving. She was just looking down at me. I felt locked to the couch. I don't know if it was because of pure fear or the effects of whatever she had obviously laced me with. I genuinely was having a hard time moving my limbs. I felt weak and helpless. All I could manage to say was Tracy a couple more times. She turned toward the stairs, and again I swear she sprinted toward them. And all I heard were the disturbingly loud stomps of her running down the stairs. I heard something slam from downstairs looking back. I'd imagine it was the front door. Everything looked and sounded so wonky in those minutes after I woke up. Each passing minute I felt more and more clear-headed, and moving became easier. I checked Snapchat to see that her account was gone because she blocked me. Each passing minute I felt more and more clear-headed, and moving became easier. I looked out the front window and saw no cars outside besides my own and the neighbors. And then I realized I never saw the vehicle she arrived in, or if she even arrived in one. I checked my entire home from top to bottom, looking for anything that could have been stolen. The only items I found missing seemed kind of bizarre at first, but honestly made so much sense soon after. Every last bottle of pills from my house was gone. All my vitamins and supplements, my bottles of Adderall, and even the bottle of Oxy that I had prescribed but never fully used after a surgery. Those were in the drawer next to my bed. I noticed a bottle of vodka was taken from my mini fridge in my room too, but other than that, I didn't see anything else missing. Still, I called the police right then and reported the robbery. I gave the Snapchat username and explained that I never got her number or really knew anything about her identity besides the name she gave me, which was Tracy Gibson. The police knocked on my neighbor's door, since all of our homes are attached, even though it was like 1 a.m. With me standing next to them, they asked if he'd seen or heard anything strange, to which he said no, he'd been asleep. After about 20 minutes, the police left. I made sure all of my keys were still in place, just to be sure she couldn't get back in. But other than that, this Tracy person disappeared without a trace. I knew her behavior was quirky and wonky from the first few minutes of meeting her, and it makes so much sense now. I won't even call it a theory because I just know this is the truth. I think that girl or woman, I should say, was older than she claimed, and she was potentially homeless with a serious drug addiction. I think she drowned herself in perfume to mask the body odor that was honestly still showing through. She laced my wine with something when I was in the attic, clearly. I don't know exactly how long I was out, but it was enough time for her to scour my entire home for any and all drugs and supplements. I still remember how disturbing of an image it was seeing her tall silhouette standing in front of me while I was just waking up on the couch. Honestly, after this, I didn't even decorate the tree that year. Santa at the door. This happened on Christmas Eve back in '97 when I was 7 years old. Since we're Jewish, we don't celebrate Christmas, so Christmas Eve was just like any other night for us. Our dad is a doctor, and since he's Jewish, he always works on call at the hospital during the Christmas holidays. So he wasn't home that night. That just left my little sister and me by ourselves for the evening while our dad worked. Technically, our mom was home, but to be blunt, she was an alcoholic. Back then, being 7 years old, I had no idea what alcoholism was. All I knew was that my mom was always passed out once it got dark and near impossible to wake up. Sorry if that sounds harsh or TMI, but it's relevant to my story. My sister and I were downstairs watching TV when we heard a knock at the door. Being the oldest, I went to see who it was. Our door had glass panes built into it, which made it easy to see who was on the other side. There was a man standing outside in a Santa suit holding a bag, and when he saw me, he smiled and waved for me to come to the door. I went near the door but did not open it, and I thought it was odd that someone dressed like Santa would come to our house out of anyone's in the neighborhood. He said, "Hey kid, it's me, Santa. Let me in, I'll give you your presents." I remember telling him point blank that Santa isn't real, and that if he was, he doesn't give Jews presents anyway. That's when he said, "Of course I'm real." In the past, I only used to visit Christian homes, but lately I felt bad that Jewish kids never get any presents. So this year I changed the rules so that you can get presents too. But I didn't buy it, and instead, I remember getting mad at him, arguing that Jews get presents, we just get them during Hanukkah and not on Christmas. The smile fell from his face, and all his jolly charm disappeared as he began demanding I open the door. I told my sister to dial 911, and the guy seemed to run away. We did call the cops. However, unfortunately, the operator didn't understand what we were saying. Looking back, I think she may have thought we were just little kids excited that Santa Claus was coming to our house. Regardless, she didn't take us seriously, and instead just told us that this number was to be used for emergencies, only before disconnecting the call. My sister and I now got really scared because we didn't know who else to call. Since we were only 4 and 7, the only numbers we knew how to dial were our home number and 911. And since this was the 90s, my dad didn't have his cell phone yet, and I had no idea what the hospital number was to reach him there. And with our mom impossible for us to wake up, we were essentially on our own. We hoped the man wouldn't come back, but a few minutes later he was knocking on the door again. He said he knew the cops weren't coming and to go ahead and let him in or we'd be in big trouble. My sister started crying and ran upstairs trying to wake my mom. Not knowing what else to do, I did the one thing that made sense to my 7-year-old brain. I grabbed a bunch of candles we kept for our menorah and lit them all, then ran below where the smoke detector was. I blew out all the candles quickly before tossing them up toward the smoke detector. Thankfully, they gave off enough smoke to set off the smoke alarm. As an adult, I realized how stupid this was, and fortunately I didn't accidentally set the house on fire, But at that time, all I knew was that the smoke alarm would instantly call 911 for me and send help to our home. There was a fire department not even 2 minutes from our house, so they got here pretty fast. My sister came downstairs, scared of the fire alarm, but I told her there was no fire and to not go outside, but instead wait inside with me. To my amazement, the guy still did not leave. Instead, the bastard ran to the firefighters, presumably telling them that he was glad they showed up. I remember him claiming he was my dad and that he dressed up like Santa Claus on Christmas Eve to surprise us. He explained that his suit didn't have any pockets to hold his keys, and that with the door locked, he couldn't get inside to save us from the fire. So he begged the firefighters to break down the door, and surprisingly, the firefighters seemed to believe him. They were actually getting ready to break down the door and told us to stand back, but we started crying, shouting at them that he wasn't our dad, that our dad was working at the hospital, that we had no idea who this guy was, and that we didn't even celebrate Christmas. The firefighter who was about to break down the door thankfully stopped and listened to us. He asked, "You don't celebrate Christmas?" I told him no because we're Jewish and showed him my kippah on my head as well as our menorah. I then broke down crying, explaining how I set off the smoke alarm to try and get help because the police wouldn't believe us, and begged him not to let the guy in. The firefighter thankfully believed me and then asked the man why Santa would show up to a Jewish home. I don't remember exactly what the guy said, but the firefighters clearly didn't believe him. 2 of them wrestled the man to the ground while another called the police to come by. They also asked what hospital my dad worked at so they could let him know what was going on. The police arrived and arrested the guy, while another officer stayed with us until my dad came home and explained the situation to him. My dad was furious with our mom for being wasted and essentially sleeping through the whole thing, but mostly he was grateful that we were okay. As far as Christmases go, I was glad to have our usual boring and quiet Christmas the following year. To this day, I think being Jewish saved my sisters and my life, because had we opened that door to let Santa in, there's a good chance that would have been our final Christmas. The Pocono Airbnb. It was December 2022. My girlfriend Charlotte and I were driving to the Pocono Mountains. We had rented a super cozy-looking Airbnb decked out with Christmas decorations, and it was nicely located with a great view, a big property, and not far from a cute little village. To make things feel even more festive, there was a snowstorm coming that night, so we set out a little earlier to allow time to get groceries and get everything set up in the Airbnb. From the city to the Poconos was about 4 hours. We made decent time. We stopped at a Family Dollar for some snacks and groceries, and then we went straight to the Airbnb. We turned toward the uphill gravel road through a clearing in the trees that led to the property. The house was surrounded by woods. It had a big deck with a hot tub on it, which was very appealing, especially the idea of sitting in it during a snowstorm. There were a bunch of Christmas decorations on the property, including some light-up reindeer, a big snowman, and big decorative candy canes lining the walkway to the front deck. We had to take a few trips to and from the car to bring everything inside. First impression, the place had a very comfy feeling, just like we expected from the pictures. It had a Christmas tree in one corner, stockings hung on the walls, and a bunch of smaller decorations scattered about. It had that very welcoming smell of wood that you'd expect in a country log cabin, though it was more so just a regular house. Then I realized why there was a stack of logs next to a big fireplace in the living room. There were 3 bedrooms, though of course we only needed 1. We put our luggage and such in a second bedroom. I did the usual stuff like inspect the fridge, turn on the TV to see if there was cable or Netflix, and look out all the windows. There was an upstairs, but it was more of a loft with a pool table and a couple of couches. Then there was a basement. For the hell of it, I went down to check out the basement. It was fairly big relative to the size of the house. It felt disconnected from the Airbnb, though not furnished for hanging out in. It was dark and cold, and felt more like a space to do laundry or a workspace. Then there was a knock at the front door. I hurried up to answer it, and there was a guy who looked to be in his late 40s. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a ripped-up yellowish-brown jacket. He smiled at me and said, "How are you folks doing?" I replied good and asked him if he was the Airbnb host. He replied that he runs the place with his brother. I asked for his name, and he said Tom. Tom said he lives just up the road next door if my girl and I need anything. I thanked him, and then he walked away. I found it interesting that he knew I was with my girlfriend Charlotte didn't come to the door, but maybe his brother told him about us. I did have a conversation with Mike, the host, about it being my girlfriend and me wanting to do something festive. It was pitch black out and it was snowing. We cranked up the heat in the house and started preparing the dinner we bought, which was chicken thighs, broccoli, potatoes, and cornbread. It was a pretty grab bag dinner. We ate on the couch with the Christmas tree lights on in the corner, giving the room a nice comfy glow as we watched the Polar Express. It was the only good Christmas movie on any of the streaming platforms. If you can't tell, we really love Christmas. After the movie, and after we felt we had digested enough, we went outside to the deck to hop in the hot tub. I turned on all the decorations and Christmas lights in the front yard, and as we sat in the hot tub watching the snowfall, it felt like bliss until the bubbles on the hot tub stopped, and it went silent. We heard unmistakable footsteps from somewhere on the property. Charlotte and I looked at one another. I asked her if I should shout, "Who's there?" but she said no. The footsteps moved further and further away until they were no longer audible. I told Charlotte it was probably a deer, but deep down I knew those were the footsteps of a person. After the hot tub, we went to take a shower before bed. The hot water in the shower didn't last for more than maybe 2 minutes, though. Something was wrong. When the water turned ice cold, we screamed and jumped out of the shower. I messaged Mike, the host, about it. He responded within half an hour, saying that's odd and that he'd have a guy come and look at the hot water heater tomorrow. We went to sleep after our half shower. In the middle of the night, though, we awoke to very aggressive bangs on the front door of the house. Charlotte was shaking me, terrified. I said I was going to check who it was, but she demanded I stay in the bed and not make a sound. Honestly, I was glad she said that. No part of me wanted to know who was at the door in the middle of the night. I think there were 3 sets of really loud and angry-sounding bangs before they stopped. We sat upright for a few minutes in silence, whispering to each other. I went over to lock the bedroom door for added security, I guess. Minutes dragged along, but ultimately, after about half an hour of sitting wide awake, we eventually drifted back off to sleep. First thing in the morning, I messaged Mike again about the knocks at the door. He answered more quickly this time, seeming pretty confused like us. He basically said how strange that was and that he didn't know why anyone would be roaming around late at night like that. He said if anything like that happens again, we should alert the authorities. Honestly, not the most reassuring response, but he was right. What else could he tell us? Grab a gun and shoot whoever was at the door? I didn't want to keep complaining to Mike constantly, but these were some pretty valid concerns. There was a lot of snow outside, and it was a dark, cloudy day. There were still some flurries falling onto the ground. I went out to wipe the snow off my Jeep, and while I was doing so, I noticed footsteps in the snow. They looped around the house. I remembered the knocks from the night before and wondered if it was from the same person. But these footprints looked fresh, and it snowed all night. Surely the footprints from last night would have filled in by now. I heard footsteps approaching now, actually, and saw Tom walking from around my car. I told him about the hot water heater problem and that Mike said they were sending someone to take a look at it. He said he knew and that he was here to take a look at it, actually. I also told him about the knocks at the door last night and the footprints in the snow. I even showed him. He looked at them and said there are a lot of strange folk out here that go snooping around at night. I asked if we should refrain from using the hot tub at night then, and he said no, that shouldn't be a problem. The people around here are harmless. He went inside the house and walked around for a bit before walking down to the basement. He told me he'd have a look at the hot water heater. Tom seemed like a weird dude, honestly. I messaged Mike saying Tom was here now checking out the water heater. Mike replied back asking, "Is Tom the name of the plumber?" And I replied, "No, your brother." He replied, "What do you mean?" He said, "Is my brother?" It started to click in my head. I responded, "Do you have a brother named Tom who runs this Airbnb with you?" And he replied, "No, who is this person?" I hurried to Charlotte and told her to collect her things quietly. We needed to get out of there. As quickly as we could, we packed our bags, grabbed all of our stuff, and brought it outside to the car in one trip. I'm sure we left behind a charger or something small, but who cares? We got in my car, and when I started it, I looked in the rear view mirror and saw Tom quickly approaching the rear of the Jeep. I put it in drive and got out of there as quickly as I could. When we were back on the road, we called Mike and explained everything and told him he needed to call the police now. He didn't stay on the line long, but 20 minutes later he called us back who were still in the car. He said the police were there now and didn't see anyone in the house. Mike was on his way to the house as well, but he was mostly calling to get more details from us. We drove around the area and explored just as a way to calm our nerves after what happened. After a few hours, we drove home. Mike messaged me later that night, updating me and apologizing for everything. He said he didn't know anyone who resembled my description of Tom. What disturbs me is that man was watching us the entire time, from the moment we arrived to when we were in the hot tube, and he was probably the one banging on the front door in the middle of the night. Who knows what his intentions were? It's a good thing we left when we did. The voice in the slide back before phones and social media took over the planet. We actually had to go outside as kids. Maybe it's just where I live, but I don't see kids riding their bikes around or playing ding-dong ditch or doing any of those late-night troublesome kid activities anymore. But when I was a kid, anywhere from 9 to 17 years old, I was always outside with friends. At my childhood home, there was a park down the block that some of my friends and I used as a hangout spot, especially at night since our parents would get mad at us for being loud. The park was perfect because it had a small patch of woods on 3 sides, and then it faced the street on the 4th side, and across from the park was another small patch of woods. So basically, we didn't have any neighboring houses watching us or calling the cops on us for making too much noise. This happened when I was about 13, that age when we were riding bikes to get literally everywhere every day. I think that day was a Saturday, and we had ridden to a nearby pizza place earlier, then went back to my friend Tony's house, which wasn't far from mine. The 6 of us were hanging out in his backyard until his mom came outside and yelled at him to either be quiet, send his friends home, or go hang out somewhere else. By that point, 3 of our friends decided to go home. Me, Tony, and our friend Rob decided to ride to the park instead of calling it a night. It was only about a 5-minute bike ride, and there was something so refreshing about riding bikes at night. It felt easier and more relaxing. So the 3 of us got to the park, and besides its surroundings, the park had a small baseball field, a small bleacher stand, a couple of typical park benches, and a decently sized playground with a swing set. We would always chill on the playground because it was a cool, elevated, hidden surface to hang out on. At some point while we were chilling, Tony suddenly went, "Shh, did you hear that?" We all stopped talking to listen. When nothing happened, Tony explained that he thought he heard a footstep or some kind of thump on the playground that wasn't us. Naturally, we all took a quick glance around and didn't see anyone. But a few minutes later, there was a sound that we all heard this time, and it did sound like some kind of thud coming from somewhere on the playground itself. Now we were slightly unsettled because we were almost certain someone else was there making that noise. So we took another look, this time actually getting up and walking around, even calling out to ask who was there. Of course, there was no response. Eventually, we settled back down on the playground. We stayed alert for a few more minutes until we heard yet another sound, and this time it was much more unsettling. The sound of a voice. A child's voice. And it came from inside the slide, one of those twirling metal slides you see at most playgrounds. I'm not going to lie, when we heard it, we genuinely freaked out. Even though we did hear weird sounds before, we hadn't heard anyone climbing into the slide, and the thumping sounds definitely hadn't come from it. So naturally, I walked over to the slide and listened. Then I said, "Is someone in there?" And a voice said back, "Hello." It was a child's voice. I want to say a boy, sounding like a toddler. I was 90% sure they said hello. My friends heard it too. We all gave each other terrified looks. We had not heard anyone in that slide for the entire half hour we'd been there. I sat down at the slide and said, "Do you need help?" But now there was no response. In fact, we didn't hear the voice again. I had to assume there was a little kid stuck in there, so I climbed in and slid down. But as I slid down, expecting a child to appear around the corner the entire time, I reached the bottom only to find it completely empty. I scanned the ground level of the playground and the surrounding area, and there wasn't a soul in sight. My friends were just as shocked as I was. There was literally no one besides us, and I am telling you it was not possible for someone to run away that quickly, especially not a young child. We checked every possible hiding spot and found nothing. We were already beyond freaked out, but when we heard the same voice again coming from the slide, this time saying, "Catch me," we all bolted for our bikes. We pedaled faster than ever back to my house down the block. We regrouped and caught our breath in my backyard, trying to stay quiet, since my dad was probably asleep and would get mad if we were loud. We sat there whispering about what happened and trying to come up with any possible explanation. But things only got stranger when there was a knocking on the backyard gate, someone knocking as if politely asking to come in. I said, "Who is that?" thinking it might be a family member, but it was an unfamiliar woman's voice. She said hello, then asked, "Were you guys just at the park before?" We looked at each other in fear. There was a tiny crack in the gate where it met the fence, and you could look through it to the other side. I peeked, and what I saw was a middle-aged woman standing there with a wide, creepy grin on her face, already staring directly at me through the crack as if she knew exactly where to look. I stepped away from the gate because the sight was so disturbing. I backed up and said, "No, sorry." The woman replied, "Are you sure?" And Tony answered for me, saying, "No, we weren't." She said, "Okay, thanks anyway." I stepped back toward the gate to see if she was leaving, but she was still there, smiling and looking at me through the crack. We were so freaked out that we went inside my house through the back door. We quietly hung out downstairs for a while, completely shaken. That woman was terrifying, everything about her. My friends were too scared to go back outside for their bikes, so they slept over and left in the morning. We didn't go back to that park for a long time. If we really wanted to explain it away, we could say there was a kid who ran away from his mother and was playing at the park, and the mother was out looking for him. But it doesn't make sense, because we rode home so fast that no one on foot could have followed us. Also, we know for a fact that we didn't see any kid running around the playground. So what the actual hell did we hear inside that slide? Who was that? Who was the woman? At this point, it's a distant memory that will simply never be solved. I never thought a normal walk in the park could turn into one of the scariest nights of my life. But it did. The Man in the Hoodie. I live in a small suburban town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else, and most people think it's safe to be outside at any time. It was a Friday night in the summer of 2018. I had just finished a late shift at work and wanted to clear my head before going home. The local park was only a few blocks away from my apartment, and I used it a lot to jog or walk when I needed to think. That night, it was quiet, almost too quiet. The sun had set maybe an hour earlier. The streetlights inside the park were on, but the main walking path still felt shadowed under the trees. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I entered, the smell of freshly cut grass lingering in the air. I wasn't expecting anyone to be there. Most of the time on a weekday night I'd be alone or maybe see a few people walking dogs or a couple of teenagers sitting on the benches. I had my headphones in, listening to music at a low volume, and I started walking along the main path. At first, everything was normal. I noticed a couple of dogs running in the distance and some people walking slowly, laughing quietly. It felt calm, almost therapeutic. But then I started noticing little things that made me uneasy, though at the time I tried to brush them off. The first thing I noticed was a man sitting on a bench not far from the path. He was wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled up over his head even though it wasn't cold. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting and staring straight ahead. I didn't think much of it at first. People sit on benches all the time, but as I passed, I realized he was looking at me. He didn't move when I walked by, didn't even shift his eyes. It made me uncomfortable, so I picked up my pace a little, telling myself he was probably harmless. I kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I paused, and the footsteps stopped. I waited a few seconds, then continued walking. They started again, matching my pace exactly. My heart started to beat faster, but I told myself it was probably just someone else taking their own walk. Still, the footsteps were too deliberate, too in sync with mine. I decided to take a different path, one that led through a smaller section of the park with fewer lights. The main path was still ahead, but I wanted to cut through a side trail that looped back toward the street. I figured I could get home faster that way and maybe avoid whoever was behind me. As I turned onto the trail, I noticed the man from the bench had stood up and was walking in the same direction. I thought maybe it was a coincidence, but something about the way he moved made me stop and stare. He wasn't jogging or strolling. It was slow, almost like he was matching my pace without looking directly at me. I took out my phone and pretended to make a call. The man didn't react. He didn't seem to care that I was watching him. I forced myself to keep walking, trying not to panic. I thought maybe if I went faster, he'd eventually leave me alone. I broke into a light jog, and he did the same, keeping the exact same distance behind me. My mind raced. Why was he following me? Was he dangerous? Should I run back the way I came? I decided to leave the park completely. There was a street exit just ahead that led toward a well-lit neighborhood. I broke into a faster run, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The footsteps behind me sped up, matching mine perfectly. I didn't look back, I just ran. When I reached the street, I slowed down and finally glanced behind me. The man had stopped at the edge of the park, standing in the shadows inside the trees. I could see the hood over his head, the dark shape against the dim path. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I don't know how long I stood there before I turned and ran home. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my apartment door. I thought that would be the end of it. I told myself it was probably just a creepy guy who liked to follow people, maybe harmless. I kept imagining rational explanations. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he just liked watching people walk. I tried to go back to my normal life, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. A few nights later, I was back at the same park, this time during the day, trying to convince myself it was safe. I walked along the same path I had walked that night, scanning the area for anything unusual. Everything looked normal, and I started to relax a little. But then I noticed the same bench where I had first seen him. It was empty now, but someone had scratched something into the wood. I couldn't make out what it said. The letters looked hastily carved, some smeared as if whoever did it didn't want it to be legible. My stomach turned. I snapped a picture and walked away quickly. After that, I tried to avoid the park at night completely. But the worst part wasn't that I felt unsafe. It was the feeling that someone knew I had been there, that someone was waiting even when I wasn't looking. I started noticing small things in the neighborhood too, shadows moving in the corner of my eye, a figure across the street that would vanish when I looked directly, a car parked down the block that I didn't recognize, lights turning on in houses when I walked past. I kept telling myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining things, but the memory of that night never left me. One evening, maybe 2 weeks later, I decided to go jogging again in the early evening, thinking it was safer than nighttime. I stayed on the main street, not going into the park at all. As I passed the edge of the park, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A figure standing just inside the tree line, barely visible. It was the same height and build as the man from before, and the hood was up again. I froze. He didn't move, but I had this overwhelming feeling that he had been there for hours, just watching. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to walk slowly, keeping my eyes on him. When I reached my car, I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove away, constantly checking the rear view mirror. I never saw him again after that night at least. Not in the park, but sometimes when I walk through the neighborhood, or even near my apartment, I get that same feeling that someone is watching me just beyond my line of sight. I've checked the park's security cameras in the past, and nothing unusual shows up. No one was captured entering the park at night, and the areas I walked are supposedly covered by cameras. I don't know if he knew how to avoid them or if he had been living there without anyone noticing. The strangest part is that I never heard anything from him directly, no voice. No movement besides the footsteps, just that presence. I've told friends and family, but most of them dismiss it as paranoia. I know what I experienced, and I can't explain it. I've learned to avoid that park completely at night, and even during the day I stay on the main streets, but the memory sticks with me. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring at the dark tree line where he stood, wondering if he's still there, waiting for someone else. I never go back, but a small, irrational part of me feels like he could still be there, even now, hiding just out of sight, watching anyone who dares walk alone. I don't know why he picked me or if it was random. I don't know if he was dangerous or just interested. All I know is that feeling of being followed, of being watched without anyone seeing. It's something he'll never forget. Even writing this now, I feel a chill remembering the quiet way he moved, how he stayed just out of reach but always present. I still take my walks, but I make sure I'm never alone in the park after dark. And sometimes, when I'm home, I swear I hear footsteps outside, far enough away to be ignored, but close enough to remind me that I'm being watched. I tell myself it's probably nothing. I hope it is, but I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, he's still waiting, watching, stalking me like he did that night. I never reported him to the police. There was no evidence or proof that anyone was there except me. I thought about it, but I couldn't even describe him clearly, just a hoodie, a vague shape, and the feeling that he knew everything I was doing. The uncertainty is what haunts me the most. I have no idea who he was, why he was there, or if he's still around. Even walking past that park during the day makes me tense, even now, years later. If I'm driving past, I sometimes feel like I see a figure standing at the edge of the trees. I can't tell if it's real or just my imagination. I don't stop to find out. I just keep driving, hoping I never have to walk that path alone again. The truck in the loop. This event happened less than 24 hours ago, and the details are still incredibly vivid in my head. I'm not even sure how to classify this story because it was so bizarre. It was the only time in my life that I've ever felt like I was actually in serious danger. My friends and I, a group of 6, were hanging out at a popular public park in my area called the Overlook, because it had a great view of downtown and the nearby universities. It was very late in the evening, around 11 o'clock. It was supposed to be just a chill rendezvous. We had no plans beyond sitting on the park benches and talking. However, one of my friends said he had Roman candles in his trunk and suggested we light them off. The Overlook is probably the worst place in the park to light fireworks, so I suggested we go to a more secluded part of the park called the Loop. The Loop is just a few minutes away from the Overlook, and most of it is surrounded by trees, so only people within that part of the park would be able to see what we were doing. All 6 of us piled into 2 cars and made our way over. Although there was plenty of street parking within the Loop, we decided to park outside on a nearby street, just in case anything went wrong. We started walking toward the actual loop, which is basically a huge cul-de-sac surrounded by woods. The driveway to the loop is long and winding, cutting through a thick tree line, and you can't see anything within the loop from outside because of the trees. We noticed a few cars parked in different spots, but we thought nothing of it since people walk in the park frequently, though it was strange for such a late hour. As we walked deeper into the loop, we noticed several cars parked around the cul-de-sac with their lights off. Suddenly, a truck behind us started moving with its headlights off. It was facing the opposite direction, toward the entrance of the loop, but it quickly made a U-turn and headed in our direction. We all found this strange and hid behind some trees. The truck passed us slowly, continued around the loop, drove back toward the entrance, stopped suddenly, and made another U-turn. All of our stomachs sank. The truck was small, probably only fitting 3 people, yet there were 6 of us, all over 6 feet tall. Still, we were frightened and creeped out. For some reason, my friend thought it was the perfect time to light a Roman candle, and sparks flew in our direction. The truck immediately turned on its headlights and began slowly driving toward us. We ran further into the tree line, which was on a downward slope, and hid behind more trees. But the truck went over the curb and onto the grass, driving toward us. Whoever was driving must have seen us running, because they turned on their high beams and laid on the horn. We sprinted as fast as we could into the woods. These weren't paths people normally walked through. There were bushes and tall grass, making it difficult to move. About 20 feet into the woods, we began hearing voices from the truck and saw more headlights turning on from the loop. During our sprint, we had become separated. I was with 2 friends and had no idea where the other 3 were, but that wasn't our main concern. 2 men stepped out of the truck and sprinted down into the woods with flashlights. My friends and I lay flat on the ground, trying to stay hidden. I managed to squeeze under a large bush, but my other 2 friends were still partially exposed. We were in a sunken part of the woods, with part of the loop directly above us. It was quiet for a few minutes until we heard footsteps and saw flashlights from above. We didn't know if they could see us, but we were basically trapped. One group was searching from the front, and another was searching from above. We didn't understand why they were so upset about the fireworks. None of them had gotten near any of their vehicles, and fireworks are legal in our state. All we could do was hide and hope they didn't find us. After about 15 minutes, we saw the truck pull out of the grass and back onto the street, then drive away. The other headlights disappeared, but we never saw the men who had entered the woods come out. To make matters worse, one of my friends realized he had lost his phone somewhere in the woods while running. Finding it was surprisingly easy, but sneaking out of the woods and back onto the road leading toward the loop was difficult. It was pitch black, and we couldn't use our flashlights or phones because we didn't want to alert the men to our location. We regrouped with one friend who had been hiding close by. He said one of the men had run right past him but hadn't seen him. However, he noticed the man was carrying what looked like a knife or some kind of melee weapon. After hearing this, we sprinted down the road toward the entrance. That's when we noticed the same truck from earlier, about 50 feet from the entrance. Fortunately, a dense patch of woods nearby allowed us to sneak into it and move toward the exit. Somehow, whoever was in the truck realized we had started moving, because they immediately turned on their high beams and pulled the truck to the edge of the woods. At that point, we ran as fast as we could. The truck followed us along the road, but we quickly cut deeper into the woods. Eventually, we reached a main road that led out of the loop. The truck didn't follow beyond the entrance. We took 2 different back roads to get back to our cars to make sure we weren't being followed. We didn't hear from our other friends until a few hours later. They had managed to escape much quicker by running without hiding. Never going back to the loop. I don't know what those people wanted or why they made such an effort to hunt us through the woods, but I'm sure it wasn't good. It felt like an eternity, and I've never been more scared in my life. I truly didn't know what was going to happen.